Well, hello everyone. It's great to have you joining us today, and I'm very excited to be able to talk about our new Builder MCP, which is a way for you to build Flowgear workflows agentically from outside of the Flowgear platform. But before we get into that, I actually want to start by asking, why would you want to do this? What problem are we actually solving here? And there are two parts to that. The first is that building backend is actually quite complicated. There are many decisions to make around the architecture that you use. Once you've made an overall stack or architecture decision, there are many sub-decisions still to make, and many of them pertain to security. How are you storing credentials? Are you ensuring that data that's moving back and forth between apps is done so over a secure transport? What is getting logged? How do you manage changes and so forth? And so, although open-ended coding gives you a huge amount of flexibility, if this is not your area, then it's very easy to do things in a way that is unsafe. Whereas by contrast with Flowgear, it's deliberately an opinionated platform. It provides what we call a domain-specific language. It's designed just for integration. And all the decisions have already been made for you. How we create connections, how we store those, what the designs of workflows look like, how we record the logs after they've run, how you make changes over time and move designs across different environments and through into production with the appropriate amount of control. So this makes not just for higher success rates, but a better control and governance process, which brings me to the second aspect of backend, which is that dealing with governance can often be a nightmare. I came across this tweet as I was preparing for this earlier today, just from yesterday, in fact. Peter Gurners is a program manager over at Amazon, and he's talking about exactly this problem where, because the kind of barrier to entry is now so much lower, everyone can build apps. That's exactly what they're doing. And the result is kind of an AI sprawl. And what's lost is the governance process that existed before. That process existed because it wasn't possible for just anyone to go ahead and create whatever apps they wanted. They had to go through a team who had the technical capability. Now that, in theory, everyone has that capability, the governance process is lost. So that's his emphasis here, but I do also recommend looking at his tweet in more detail. There's a really good commentary and some good follow-up comments on this as well. So now that we've looked at precisely what it is, or what the reasons are that you would want to use Flowgear as the backend for your apps, let's start talking about how we actually go about doing this. And we're going to recap on a few concepts as we get started here. First of all, if you're not familiar with MCP, it's Model Context Protocol. And you can think of it as a standardized way to connect between AI agents and external systems. So the types of calls that an agent needs to make can roughly be broken into two categories. First, context, and then second, actions. So under context, what we're saying is that an agent, to be able to answer a user's question, might need context information provided to it, such as a list of quotes when asked to understand pipeline of quotes that are at a certain stage based on an opportunity, for example. And then secondly, under actions, the actions tools enable an agent to take an action on behalf of a user, such as closing a quote or changing its status based on a user's request. So we've got two different types of MCP servers built inside Flowgear. The first one is what we call the Workflow MCP, and this we launched late last year. What's new is Builder MCP, which is the capability to build workflows on the fly. So just comparing those two with each other, Workflow MCP allows you to take any workflow that you've built inside Flowgear and deploy that as an MCP tool. So you can register that and you can connect it to an agent like a ChatGPT or a Claude, and then it can trigger the use of those tools when appropriate. We covered this in our September live stream, so we have that on YouTube if you want to take a look at that. What's changed there is that at the time we only had support for this under our V1 runtime. It's now baked into our V2 runtime. And if you want detail on how to set that up and how to use it, just search Workflow MCP over at help.flowgear.net. You'll find that there are two articles there. The first one is specifically for the V1 runtime. The second is for V2. And of course, we highly recommend using the V2 runtime version of that. But today, what we're mainly focusing on is Builder MCP. So it's a different MCP server, and its focus is giving you the ability to run integrations from anywhere. And doing that, you can use the same agentic tools that you're accustomed to using in your normal software development practice. And that's the whole idea, is you can not have to work using the agent that is baked into Flowgear. That agent had a set of tools available to it. What we've done is made those tools available to external agents as well, using MCP as that transport. And so the value of this is that when you're building an app, you can work in one place in your IDE and have it build both the front end directly via code and also build the back end by creating workflows on the fly that front end requires. Now, we did also talk about Flowgear apps a little earlier this year. We did a live stream on that. So if you want to catch up, you haven't used Flowgear apps before, we covered that in January. That's also on YouTube. And everything that I'm going to show you today is documented at help.flowgear.net. So just search for Builder MCP over at help.flowgear.net. All right. So recapping apps a little more. Apps are essentially a way to create very lightweight front end. That's the whole point, is that they're front end only, because the business layer is Flowgear and the data layer are the apps that contain the data that it needs to interact with. And what Flowgear apps gives you as an advantage is, first of all, very granular control. So when a Flowgear app runs, it embeds into our console. And so we know the identity of the user that's currently signed in, and you can use that to make decisions around which workflows they're able to use. If you're familiar with our API keys, that's where you set that up. So you'll collate together a set of app users and a set of workflows that are allowed to run. Those are the only workflows they'd be able to use. The second is, for what it's worth, we take care of the hosting around that. It's a static app, but we host it nonetheless, so you don't need to figure out how you're going to do that. And then third, they're very useful as kind of a way to create utilities. Some examples of how people are using it: you might have a process that exists in your businesses that isn't directly expressed in any of the apps you have, your CRM or ERP. Maybe it requires multiple steps in your ERP. So you can build an app that allows you to capture the information once, and then it'll make the calls to the different places inside your ERP on demand for you. Another case is if you are looking to reduce your license counts on a certain app. Maybe, again, it's the CRM or the ERP. Perhaps a subset of your team use those apps very infrequently, and yet for those infrequent occasions, they need to be able to do something specific. A Flowgear app lets you build a front end for just the bits that they need, and you can use API calls to interact with the underlying app instead of them requiring a dedicated user license. And then a third common example would be if you have a business process that actually straddles multiple apps. So maybe it's something like processing an order, where you do some work in the CRM, then you do some work in the ERP, and then some work in the warehouse management system, as an example. Apps give you the ability to create one front end that people can interact with, that in turn makes the calls onto the underlying disparate systems on your behalf. So with the context of MCP in place and the context of Flowgear apps in place, let's look at what it looks like to actually start doing this. And I'm going to kick into a demo around this as well. And I'm going to jump straight into it, and then I'll circle back and explain what's happened, because it's going to take a few minutes for the agent to run, and I just want to give it some time to do that. So let's flip across to VS Code, where I have all of this set up. So I'm going to explain all of this in a second, but for now, I'm just going to ask the agent to do something for us. Let's say create a view of Salesforce contacts. Let's say first 10 Salesforce contacts, add a text box to filter by name. And I'm just going to give it one little nudge, run the filter server side. We're just going to leave that. I'll just check that it's kicking off correctly, and then we'll carry on with talking about how we get to this point. And if you do have any questions, I'll take them at the end. So feel free to pop that into the Q&A chat. I'm going to keep that open here. I'll be very happy to give you more context if you have any questions as we go along. All right, so this looks like it's chugging away just fine. So let's go flip back again. Here are the 4 steps. First of all, we need to get a sample app. Second, we're going to choose an IDE and an agent. I'll give you some options around that. Third, we're going to deal with registering the Builder MCP. And then fourth, I'll give you some tips on prompting the agent for an effective result there. All right, so let's start with the sample app. The first thing you're going to do here is you want to get an example of an app that we pre-configured for you. That's going to be an empty Flowgear app. You can build any front end that you like, but if this is the first app you're building, we recommend starting with our sample just because it's going to get you from 0 to 1 very quickly, and it pretty much just works out the box. And when you're feeling more adventurous, you can certainly create an app that's independent if you want. So we go straight to Flowgear, go into the settings area, manage apps, and then we download a sample app. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to open a browser window here. All right. Okay, so as long as you're an admin on your account, you're going to be able to go to settings over here and then go to manage apps, and you'll see a download sample app button over here. And this is going to serve an app that is pre-configured for you. You've got the site that you want the app to be tested against, the environment. I recommend just leaving those as is. You've also got an option for an API key. We're actually not going to get into that because the whole point of this is that the agent is going to create all of this stuff on the fly for us. So I'm just going to leave that empty. And then finally, I'll click download, and that will serve that zip file to me. And that's basically it. So let's go to that file. So here's the zip that I just created. I'm just going to open that up. And then we can start a new instance of VS Code over here and point it to this folder. So this is the structure that we've got set up. A couple of things going on here. Under the SRC folder is our web app, and this is just a completely empty app. It just embeds into the Flowgear console. I'll show you that in a second. Then we've got what we call an env local file. This is configuring how the app should be used when you launch it. So it tells the shim how to embed it into the platform. So here you can see it's pre-configured my tenant key and my site key and my environment key. And then the way that we're directing this is through this agent's MD file. So this tells the agent that you're using exactly how this is structured, how it should be debugged. We have some core rules on how it actually, the mechanics of how it's going to run workflow invokes. Down here, we start to explain how MCP needs to work. You don't need to work through all of this, but your agent will. And even if you're not comfortable with working in the terminal, it's generally going to be able to give you a pretty good, it's going to be able to run these setup steps for you as well, if necessary. So let's have a look at whether this is just working out the gate with our empty app. I'm just going to do two things. One is a package install to install the dependencies that this app has. And all of these steps are covered in our building apps article at help.flowgear.net. So don't rush to try and take notes on it. We've got all of this covered in existing help articles. Then to run the app, npm run dev. That's going to open in a browser window for us. And it's going to open two different tabs. The first one is the raw app right here. The second one is the app embedded into the console. And the reason we open the raw app is because we are debugging this, the certificate isn't trusted. So we just need to allow the browser to trust it. So we can proceed to that. That'll then load the empty app. And now if I go and refresh this over here, there's my Hello World app. So this is the empty state of the app that we're going to be beginning with. All right. So what I showed you there is how we got the app from the Manage Apps screen in Flowgear. We do also have a public repository that you can go ahead and clone. Just bear in mind that if you're going to go that route, you'll need to just configure the env local file manually. All right, now next decision point is what agent and IDE or just standalone agent you want to use. Broadly, there are two different options available to you here. Certainly if you're a developer, you're going to want to use an IDE. If you don't have a preference on that, go with VS Code. It's a great IDE. It's one that we generally use here. And then along with that, we've done a lot of work, particularly on Codex and Claude Code. The product will work with other agents as well, but those are the two that we primarily work with. So you're going to install the IDE, and then you're going to install the extension for the agent. And the way you'll do that, let's just go back to the IDE, is go to the extensions option here. So kind of this package option over on the left-hand side, and then just search for those extensions. So either you're going to be using Codex, which is the OpenAI product. Just be sure that you're using the official ones. You've got that blue badge there, you know that's from OpenAI. I, of course, already have it installed. And then the other option would be Claude, which is going to be by Anthropic. So be careful that you've got the official extension if you go that route. If you go this route, you're going to use CLI command. So you're going to use command line to register your Builder MCP on the next step. It's not particularly involved, but you do need to know how to do that. And then if you're not a developer, it might be more comfortable for you to work in the desktop apps. So for Codex, that would be or OpenAI, let's say, that would be Codex app. Or for Anthropic, that would be Claude desktop. I'll show you what these look like just quickly. So this is Codex, and it feels similar to ChatGPT, but the key thing is that it's got this notion of a project over here. So I can create a project and point it at a folder. So if I wanted to use this Codex desktop app to be able to work on this, I could create a project that's pointed at the repository, the sample app that I just downloaded, and then it would essentially work the same way. What's going to work differently is when I register the MCP server, I'm going to do that through settings, and I'm going to do that visually instead. And then similarly for Codex, it's exactly the same principle. It has a notion of a project, and when I create a project, I can choose to point that at a folder. So again, I would get this sample app out of the console, download that, unpack that zip, and then point the project at the folder that just got unpacked. So if you don't want to work closely with the files, if you're not in a development role, this might be an easier way to work. But for today, we're mainly going to focus on the IDE and agent extension approach. All right, now the last thing we need to do is register the Builder MCP inside the IDE. We'll go through the 2 commands on this, and to help myself along, I'm also going to just keep the accompanying help article open. All of this is in the help article, and we can share the slide deck with you as well afterwards. All right. I see my Claude has just signed out, so I guess I'll just sign back into that. All right, well, let's start with Codex. So what you'll want to do here is create a terminal window, and the only piece of information we need from outside of Flowgear is, or from outside of the IDE, is the domain for your test environment. So the way you'll find that is if you go into site settings. So I just clicked on settings. Site settings is the default that loads up. Have a look at your test environment there. That's the domain that you're going to need. So we'll just copy that. And over here, we will start by registering this agent. So I'm going to say Codex MCP add. Flowgear is the name of my agent. I'm going to call it Flowgear 2 because I've already pre-configured one called Flowgear. Then I put in the URL, put an HTTPS on the front of that, and then MCP Builder. So that's the URL for the Builder MCP. Again, this is all in the help article. So when you go into that, it should pop open a browser window and allow me to authorize that use. So I'll click on next, and I should get an accept screen. That's it. And that's done. And here's how I can verify that it's worked. So I can start a new chat over here, and I can just ask it the tools in Flowgear 2 MCP server. So this is now going to do a live call to the MCP Builder server, the one called Flowgear 2, and we'll be able to see quite quickly that it's registered correctly. And that's exactly what we'd expect. So these are the tools that the internal agent uses. So if you've been using our V2 runtime and you're in the agent and you're seeing it interact, it's, typically we'll start by getting a list of connectors, then connections, then templates. it's the same tool set that we're now allowing access to from outside of the IDE. So we have Codex successfully registered here now. Let's have a look at how we would do this with Claude. Syntax is a little bit different. So Claude, we're going to go Claude MCP add. They need a transport parameter like that. I'm going to call mine Flowgear 2, just like we did just now. And then same thing on that URL. Looks like I already have one called Flowgear 2. Let's give it a different name. Okay. And now I can launch Claude. I can just do it in the terminal, or I can do it through the chat window. And there's a command /MCP. So I'm just going to do that. And here you can see, here are the MCP servers that I've registered. Flowgear 3, as you can see, needs authentication. So I'm going to go into that, tell it that I want to authenticate. Same sort of flow. So it'll pop open a browser window for me, allow me to click next. And then I can accept that connection. All right, and now we're back to the chat. So I can say, that it's able to give us the same result there. Okay, looking good. So that's the same tool list showing up in Claude that we saw in Codex a little bit earlier. All right, so now we're at a point where we're actually ready to build. So finally, let's look at some tips on how to prompt if you've not really worked with agentic build before. Now, there are a lot of tools online around this. Not all the advice is good, but here are 4 things that I think are relatively important. First thing is you want to be precise on the prompt that you specify. So spell out the logic insofar as you're able to. If you have specific preferences around style and layout, then specify that very specifically as well. Second is try not to specify multiple things in one shot, especially if you're just starting out. Just tell it to do one very specific thing and spend a bit of time describing that in the appropriate amount of detail. If you do want multiple things to happen in parallel, you can always use multiple chats and have them going in parallel. A very important step is to ask for a plan first. This is useful for 2 reasons. If you tell the agent to do a plan first, 2 things are going to happen. One is its own success is going to be better because it's produced more tokens in planning. It's actually able to foresee problems instead of only dealing with them when it does the build and then finds a problem as a result of what it's built. So a plan actually helps it to be more effective. But for your part, it's also useful because generally it'll take less time to form a plan than it will to make the changes. So if you ask for the plan first, you can review that more quickly, then ask it to make the changes and go and make the coffee. And then finally, feel free to iterate freely. So once it's got through a first round of changes, if it's mostly correct, you might want to just have a follow-up prompt to get it to fix the things that are incorrect. Or if it feels completely wrong and you realize you underspecified, then just scrap all the work and start again. So a lot of the kind of mental framework is being reset. There's not really a cost to throwing away work. It only costs you a few minutes to produce it in the first place. So if you use those 4 things, it's a good place to start, I think. It's very easy to get this stuff up and running. So we've gone through the whole reg process, gone through the whole setup. As you saw earlier, I went and kicked off a chat. This is where that chat got up to, and it looks like it's done. So it took almost 10 minutes to work through this. It's giving me a nice little summary here, telling me everything that it's done. But what I want to do is just drill into some of the trace here to show you how it was operating. And particularly notice that there are things here. There are some tool calls here. So for example, it started with a list nodes to discover the list of available connectors. And as we go down this trace, we'll start to see it refining more deeply. So it was a simple requirement. We told it it needed to work with Salesforce, so it'll just drill in on that. And then we're going to get to a point after it's chosen a connection and some templates, it's going to build a workflow in memory and then actually test it. And that's what's happening here. This is a workflow that it built on the fly and ran. And it may go through a few iterations of that, but eventually what we'll see is a save workflow call. And that means that it was happy with the results to the point that it deemed that stage complete. And then what it's been instructed to do is get the definition of that workflow and download that into this OpenAPI document which describes the interface to that workflow. So in other words, if you call here, this is where the list contacts workflow is, and these are the fields that will be given back. So it's providing that data contract, and that's what then enables it to create the front-end changes. So you can see these changes here are the front-end changes that it made to be able to build the UI. So let's see what it looks like. We'll just install packages and then see if this works. Oh, it looks like I have another version of this still running. So let's just stop the old version. Okay, so it hasn't got it entirely right. It's actually showing 4 contacts, but it's not showing the individual fields. I'm going to go to one that I had a little earlier. Just go put this in. And there we can see the contacts coming through. And we've got a filter over here. Let's try filter on a name, and we can see that that filter gets executed. So literally from 1 or 2 sentences, this is what it's been able to build. And I could do follow-up prompts on this. If I'm not happy with the layout, I can tell it about all of that. But one thing that I wanted to demonstrate as a bit more of a significant follow-up is, what if I wanted to make this 2-way? So at the moment, it's just showing me a list of contacts, but what if I wanted to make those editable? So we could do that easily. I added a follow-up and said, make this an editable list, allow these fields to be editable, and add a save button on each row. And what that looks like is this. So it looks similar, but these fields are now editable. So if we edit this name here, let's just widen the screen a little bit. Hit save, telling me that saved successfully. And just to verify that, we'll just refresh the screen. And so what it's done, as I mentioned, is built the workflow on the back end and then dynamically created front end to match it. Let's have a look at the workflow that it built. An easy way to see an example of that is in the OpenAPI doc here, this op ID. This is the ID of the workflow. So you could search on the ID, or you could search on the name of the workflow. I'm just using the ID for convenience. And yeah, it's this workflow over here. So this is the one that actually does the update of the contacts. And if I go into the design screen, here it's showing me the request that's coming in. So this is the REST request that comes in. These are the body parameters that are allowed: first name, last name, email, phone. It then goes and patches those through into Salesforce and then plugs the result of that into the output so it can be sent back. And this has been built on the fly. So any follow-up request that you have, if it determines that it needs to change the backend, in the same way that it created a workflow from scratch, it can also edit existing workflows. And then I didn't allow it to, but often if you're in a more kind of mature state and you've been doing this sort of thing for a while, you're typically going to have a number of workflows that you may want to reuse. So you can allow it to reuse workflows that solve the same problem while being careful not to negatively affect other apps that are already using those workflows. So we looked at how you would go about building these apps from the ground up. What's happening here as a concept is Flowgear Apps is now extended so that you can agentically build not just the front end of the app from one place, but you can build those backends, those workflows on the fly as well. I want to just reiterate what some of the value of this is. First of all, think about how Flowgear stores the credentials securely here. So the data can never accidentally, the connection information can never accidentally be exposed to the app. It's stored encrypted, and we're also guaranteeing that all of the interactions with the underlying apps are happening over secure transports as well. You've got things like revision and release management to make sure that appropriate process has been followed, governance process that controls exactly how these apps are going to end up shipped. You can review the design changes of the workflow, look at who made those changes, and you can control exactly which environment those changes are published to and have peers review that in order to promote them through to the production environment. Related to environments is this notion of tying it into your version control. So each of your environments can be tied to a specific branch in version control, such that by merging or moving changes from one branch to another, you're actually affecting a publish of a workflow. And then finally, as we saw earlier under Flowgear apps, you've got very granular control over exactly which users are able to access particular areas of, or particular features within apps. I'll show you what that looks like. If you go to API keys, this is a key that I've created on the fly for the user that I'm debugging and building with today. And I can see that this key is associated only with the test environment. So that's another level of control here. And then this is the list of users that are allowed to use this key, just my demo account that I'm using. And these are the workflows that are assigned access. So as I've been agentically building, it's been auto-assigning access. But once I'm ready to start shipping this app, I'd create a key against the production app. And then I'd carefully select the list of users and the list of workflows that they should be able to access. And I can go ahead and make that securely available to them. So next step would be to go and get that sample app from the Manage Apps area. A reminder that if you do need to just view a guide around this, go to help.flowgear.net and search either for building apps or Builder MCP server. We'll give you all of the detail there. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to respond. Yep, we will have a recording. We should get that out in the next day or so. No issue around that. Question here, will I be able to use Flowgear apps as a platform? To be more specific, I would want a platform where I integrate my enterprise systems into a centralized operational data store, then allow users to view the data across different systems and integration failures. Will the agents be able to build such a system? I think that's pretty much what we're aiming toward here. So Flowgear's focus has always been to be able to pull data live, on demand, because then you don't end up with sync issues. So it depends on what your objective is. If you want to be able to give people tools that they can do stuff live on the underlying apps, then you would just create workflows that do live calls to those connectors. If you want to be able to view data in aggregate and there's some compute intensive aggregation that needs to be done, then you can use Flowgear as a vehicle for migrating the data into a warehouse. And let's say, let's say it's Snowflake, or it's Google BigQuery, or it's a SQL database. You can agentically build the workflows that sync that data. Obviously, you need to consider each of the data sources. But where it's supported, you can create workflows that sync only the delta, for example, by filtering on a timestamp of last changed. And then you could absolutely build an app that points to that SQL source, that database, as a source instead of the live app. So I think both of those use cases are supported. But the real value that it's giving you is that it's one place to build all backend, and it's taking care of all of the decisions that would be hard to make if you aren't in a technical domain, while ensuring that you're getting good reuse out of things that have already been built. All right, got a question here around when this is available. So this is actually shipped. This is all available immediately. And it's available on all of our Flowgear plans. So go ahead, try this out. You don't actually need the enterprise API access to be able to use MCP server, although you will need to have that available to be able to build apps that embed into Flowgear. All right, well, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.